Hey everyone, this is Jeff Alberts,
Brian Miner,
Alberto Nunez,
Brad Loomis,
and Eric Helms.
and this is the 3D Muscle Journey podcast, where we bring you world-class coaching and evidence-based education for the natural bodybuilding community.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm here with our co-hosts and fellow coaches, Berto, Jeff, and Brad. And today we're going to talk about tracking our training and what goes into tracking our training, some of the tools we use as coaches to keep tabs on athletes' performance, within the context of where they're at in their diet or, off season. In maybe some of the inefficiencies that people do, maybe they focus on the logbook too much at times. And so in addition to that, I think there's common questions regarding like, how do I track certain kinds of volume, right? So hard sets, how do I track clusters? And I guess we'll see how this conversation goes, but I think a lot of it would kind of fall into the category of overanalyzing things to some extent, but we can definitely dig into that. But I guess I'll go to Brad first. Brad, when you first started training, were you tracking anything, or were you just kind of flying solo, going by feel?
Me being the numbers guy, I was definitely tracking my training. And remember, I broke my teeth in bodybuilding on the maximum overload training program. So the basic principle was double progression, but it was, if you could get 6 repetitions on anything, you go up and weight the next week. And so naturally, I mean, I still to this day have like stacks of logbooks that are sitting out in the little library where, I've got little Excel sheets that I printed out on paper, and, I'd put my load in there with all of my sets. I was basically training to failure every single set. And yeah, as soon as I got to 6, I would take my little logbook with me on road trips. Like we would go to visit other gyms, get my little logbook out. What am I doing on the barbell squat? Oh, well, last week I got 275 for 4. Don't go up this week. We're going to keep it at 275. And we're going to try to beat the logbook from the week before. And then of course, look in the logbook and say, oh, I got 2 sets of 6 or 1 set of 6 or whatever my criteria was for going up. I'd go up and weight the following week. And it was probably a little bit of a detriment, because even as early years here with 3D Muscle Journey, I would a lot of times direct my clients to try to beat the logbook from the week before, Then of course we found out, well, that's not exactly the smartest way to do things. It's very motivating and it kind of gets you up, but sometimes it's defeating and can actually run you into the ground a little bit. But yeah, I've always been that numbers guy that had to have his training tracked in a little spreadsheet, or, if nothing else, at least on a piece of paper. And I even kind of sometimes to my detriment would tune my training so that I could always use free weights. And no matter what gym I was in, I could always use the dumbbell weight of 45 pounds. There's always a dumbbell of 45 pounds. And like I said, a little bit of a detriment. That's the OCD in Brad.
Do you ever go back and look at those logbooks?
I haven't in years, to be honest with you.
I discovered a stash recently, and it's pretty fun to look at those, because you always wonder. You don't have video from those, but
yeah,
it's like I wonder what that set looked like. So, especially if it's similar numbers to what you're at now.
Yeah, I know right where they're at. I probably should. I'll have to, as soon as we're done with this call, I'll go out and break them open while Brad's slow internet's uploading all the video and audio files.
What about you guys? Because Bert, you don't really. I mean, we train together decent amount, and I never see you with a pen and paper. So
No.
How has that evolution come along?
It's crazy to an unhealthy extent, I think. I'm just so I'm about this that I know a lot of my metrics across like a lot of movements. So I just remember when I was training with Cynthia, I remember I knew her metrics as well. Like I'm like, oh, this is like, this would be good, that would be good, and I can, I could offer suggestions to her training. So I knew her PRs like by heart. So Yeah, I think now though I have leveraged tracking a little bit more, just because there's just so many more things going on in life now that I can't like sit and ruminate on today's session and envision what it's going to go like and what I'm going to go for and where I'm going to back off. Um, but I've always, and I think intuitively, most people start that way because initially, there's some rapid strength increases. So they're easy to spot, right? It's like, oh wow, like last week that was really hard. And not only did I match reps, but I got 4 more this week. But then I think when it kind of starts to matter more, that's when people, uh, like oddly enough, stop tracking their training. So right around, I'd say the intermediate phase, I think it's important to, I think now more than ever, like it's a good habit to pick up during the noob days for sure. But yeah, usually people start on the wrong end and they don't realize how objective performances will eventually lead to the structural adaptations you're looking for, right? I think anytime you can go back to a hot streak for a specific region in your body where you're just adding reps, adding load, and a few months later you were a much more capable athlete. Usually, you can look at that area and be like, "Whoa! Like, yeah, I can see it in my chest that I can bench press 225 for reps now." So I think it gets even more important as you progress through your training. However, and we'll get into this like how you should view it and how much you should expect. That's where it can get a little tricky.
What about you, Jeff?
I didn't track any of my training when I first started. So if we're talking 1986 through 1991. I just trained Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and was like, how much can I bench on Friday? That's about it. And I just tried to lift as heavy as I could, as hard as I could. Once I started tracking, it was a guy that introduced me to Mike Mentzer's HIT. And he made me take a little note because back in 1992, there was no internet. So it's like no spreadsheets and none of that. It's like a little notebook and a pencil. So he was having me track my lifts. So we're tracking the load and the reps. And I was already like self-motivated at that point. I've always been self-motivated, always trained hard. But that like leveled me up because now it's like, okay, now I'm trying to beat something. Like it gave me a lot more purpose in my training, especially, I would say intermediate at that point, but it gave me a lot of direction. So it was fun to try to beat the numbers week in and week out. And obviously I was getting stronger by doing that. And I had someone who was far more experienced than me. So he was guiding me if my form was a little bit off or whatever. But my strength level like skyrocketed just in the first 3 months of doing that. Then of course it plateaus out. But at the time, I was in Arizona for about a year training with them. And then when I moved back to California, I kept logging my training. But the gym that I was going to, Bob's Gym in Fremont, California, tiny little gym. And a lot of the guys in there didn't log training. And you'd always get the same guys asking you, how are you getting big? How are you getting strong? What are you doing? And then, you look around, you can see people in the commercial gym. You're like, they're just kind of going through the motions. They're doing the same stuff. There's no intensity. You're not really moving up in loads too much. So it's like they're not tracking. So I saw the benefit of actually keeping tabs on that early on. And I was probably like Brad, maybe a little too number focused back in that era. Because after a certain point, it's like, okay, these numbers aren't moving too much. But I would track not just like the performance metrics, but I was also tracking like my arm size, my waist size, my thigh size. Like I was measuring a little too frequently, like doing it once a week or so. It's expecting to see. But I wish I still had some of those logs. I used to have them in a box. I don't know where they went, but I remember like logging like 17-inch bicep, and this is in the early 90s. And my goal was like I want 18-inch arms. So if anything, it just kept the motivation a lot higher, and it gave me a more focus and purpose. So I personally see a ton of value in the logbook, but I also see the cons of the logbook as well. I know we're going to get into that a little bit later. But like my first like once I started logging. So we're talking early 90s all the way until, man, when I met these guys, like I was still logging stuff. And almost like I started logging even more after that, because there's other things that they're kind of teaching me that I need to pay attention to. But it's given me a lot of purpose. But now, I mean, fast forward now, like because of all the experience I have and I know training principles really well, I know I don't need to log like my reps. I don't need to log reps in reserve, those types of things. I'll log my loads though. Still, I'll log loads because it serves as a reminder of like, okay, that's what I did last week. And then in the moment, I'll just do my first set. How'd it feel? Was it good, not good, whatever? Then I'll just adjust numbers thereafter. So it's just more so like I kind of use the logbook still in the same way I did back in the day. It's like, okay, I got the mindset of trying to beat that, but I'm a lot more intelligent and wise now, like how I actually try to beat that. Back
Yeah.
then, it was just one way. Like you just do it no matter what. No matter how you feel, you just do it. And
And I
that
think
could-
early on you can kind of get away with that, you know, when you're adapting quickly. And I mean, a beginner or anybody who's kind of just maybe trained submaximally for a while, and then they're introduced to like some frame of accountability, they're going to get stronger. They're going to see those, you know, you probably can add weight to the bar every single week for a while. And yeah, that can be extremely motivating. But I think where like I look at tracking sort of similar to how I look at like tracking macros. Like it's a useful tool, but I think some people, they can kind of abandon principles for the sake of beating the logbook or like reaching their macro targets, and they can become obsessive about it to the expense of like technique, where they like, okay, I need to increase, you know, lift a little bit more next time, lift a little bit more next time. And that can come at the expense of just sloppier form. And I think we see that a lot. Whereas in a commercial gym, you know, there's the people that aren't training, pushing themselves as hard as they could be, but there's also the people that I mean, like we go to a bodybuilding gym, Berto and I, and there's plenty of people, the majority of people, I'd say 90% of people are not logging their training, if not more than that. But they're all working hard. Like they're all keeping sets challenging over time. And I think that kind of goes into the discussion of progressive overload that we've talked about before. It's like your adaptations aren't predicated on beating a previous number. They're in place, like moving the load, moving the reps, improving technique. Is a means to keep the sets challenging so they cross a threshold for stimulus for adaptation. And as you progress, you're not going to be adapting at that same rate. And so you can't expect like, okay, just because I'm a little bit, like let's say, you know, in a vacuum, you're recovering the same week to week. It's like a robot. You're still not going to be able to add a rep every single week. You know, it's like you could maybe add a half rep, or maybe that last rep, it's still at a 0 RIR, but it moves just a little bit quicker than it did the week before. And so those are adaptations. And in many cases, as people advance, they kind of keep that expectation of like, okay, I need to keep things moving on a session to session basis. And it's just unrealistic. And you know, it might take 2-3 weeks to add a rep for a given movement. So I think that's where you kind of have to shift your focus. I think for me, tracking training at this point is one, it's motivating. I think that's good. But it's good from like a diagnostic perspective, like looking back, like, okay, did this training block yield positive results, you know, compared to the block before that? And I think the more advanced somebody becomes, it's almost useful to like look at performance averages across a block. You know, like a dumbbell lateral raise is going to take years to really move the needle much on that. So, you know, okay, how was my average performance this block compared to my average performance 2 blocks ago? And like you sometimes have to zoom out as you become more advanced to sort of see those trends. And in many cases, things are going beautifully. It's just people are a little bit impatient, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly how I look at a lot of looking at training performance. I zoom out and I'll encourage people to purposely not look at their performance on a week to week, but let's monitor it, because otherwise they try to game the system. Like you were talking about, Brian. Well, you know what? I failed on and it's always nice to have an apples to apples comparison. Train to failure on something in your training, but just log it and forget about it. And then go to the next week, log it, train it to failure, try to get it in the same position, but then just train it hard, log it, move on. Try not to look at it, because otherwise, if you're looking at what you did the week before, pretty soon after about 3-4 weeks, it's like you said, Brian, their range of motion is cut down to, a half of what it was, or that lat pull down, they're heaving the thing and they got no business moving that weight for that many repetitions, but really just zoom out, just, okay, you know what? Log it, move on, log it, move on, log it, move on. And then when you're maybe at the end of a block down the road and you've got your best apples to apples comparisons and you're keeping your range of motion, you're not trying to game the system. You're not trying to beat the logbook from the week before or beat that high score, but look at where you failed this week. And then sometimes I'll put little notes on my clients at the very top. Let's reference this week to week 2. You know what I mean? And then I'll just scroll back to week 2 and, oh, look at there. You were failing on the 6th rep. You got 5.5 repetitions was what you logged. And then now you're failing at 8 repetitions. You got 7.25 that you logged. That's the kind of zooming out that I'll do kind of visually. And I haven't gotten quite to the level that you're out on comparing averages, but I don't do that for everything. I like to just pick a body part, pick a good exercise, try to put it in the same spot, and then just log and monitor, log and monitor, and log and monitor. And Alberto came up with something that he uses that I think it was a podcast that Eric Burton and I did, where he'll get that out of the way the first exercise of the day. The first exercise, get on the leg curl, take it to the house, fail, and then get to your rest of your exercises. Nice apples to apples comparison. You just get that out the way, get on with the rest of your training, and then you can look as you're kind of going down the road. And I feel like that's it kills two birds with one stone in a way. You're logging, you've got a little bit of a record of what it is that you're doing, but then you can also track your performance. And then ultimately, the reason we track performance is so that we can make adjustments, Oh, we're progressing. Well, things are good. Let's not change anything. But if you're going backwards, maybe we need to adjust a little bit. Maybe we need to bring volume down on that particular body part, or maybe we bring the frequency down instead of hitting it 3 times a week, twice a week, But like just kind of a long rant there, but ultimately I totally 100% agree with you. Don't look week to week. Don't even hardly look, except for blocks and comparison months, instead of just week to week.
I think I still like looking. It's just, you have to detach that emotion from it. I think there's
exactly.
That's like, first thing I think of here is like, and Brad, I'm sure you're familiar with this, like powerlifting training, like RPE based top sets, things like that. I'll usually include like a ballpark load for them in conjunction with RPE. That way they kind of have an anchor, like mentally. I think just seeing something on paper, like anytime I've run a really hard program and I know there's, like if I'm thinking about it ahead, not to the point of being anxious, but like almost this excited energy, I'm going to perform better. But if I go in excited to beat a performance and I know after my last warm up that it's not going to happen, like it's no sweat off my back. Like it's not a big deal at all. But I do think it's helpful, like with RPE based training, to use some ballpark loading in conjunction with that, just so people kind of have a rough place that they're aiming for, because it's very easy to go in and it's like, okay, it's 4 and 8 today and I'm feeling lazy, so let's just let's make this weight feel more difficult, and so that's for strength, that's not a good thing. For bodybuilding, it's probably not as bad of a thing, but yeah, I think just detaching that emotion from it is the key there.
While you guys are talking, I'm thinking of like, who should track when should they track and why should they track? So I'm thinking like, okay, a beginner, it makes sense to track because when you're tracking, and especially if you're having them track load, reps, and intensity, like reps in reserve, you're teaching them about training principles. And I think it's important that you're getting the fundamentals down in your earlier career because you eventually you want to transition to only tracking what you need to track. But you have to understand at that point still like why are you only tracking this? Like what's the reasonings and the whys and the hows? So I think like maybe we can talk about how like who's like for you guys who's tracking almost everything in their training. Like it's very like specific. Like we're tracking the load, we're tracking every rep for each set, we're tracking the reps in reserve. Like who's doing that and why and maybe for how long and what's the purpose of that?
I mean, I know for me, it does depend on largely on just training status. So if we kind of break it up into novice, intermediate, advanced, I think tracking as a novice, like teaching them those principles, obviously like RIR estimates, those are going to get refined over time. Like those might be wildly inaccurate out of the gate, but it's motivating for them. I think anybody, especially if somebody's really new to training and they haven't really fallen in love with it yet, like it's hard not to love getting stronger. Like there's people that, non-competitors or people that just aren't, it's not really their thing yet. And then they start training and they realize, hey, this is pretty, like I'm gaining a lot of confidence getting stronger. Like it doesn't require tracking, but it's nice to be able to quantify that. But I would look in the novice category a lot at like execution of movements. And that's like something I try to preach across a training career. Like technique and execution's like the foundation from which you should progress. Like it should never come at the expense of those other things, at least to a significant degree. Otherwise, we're just convincing ourselves of something that hasn't happened yet, right? So then when it's motivating in that novice stage, and then like intermediates, I think it's almost most important for intermediates to track more because then they can start to see like, okay, is this strategy, as long as they understand that progress is going to slow past the novice stage, but they can start seeing like, okay, I've accepted that it's starting to slow, but is it still working? So from like a diagnostic perspective, like they've learned how to push hard, but now they can actually evaluate like, is this amount of volume moving the needle? And if it is, we know it's like an overload stimulus as a whole throughout the week. And we know they don't have to add more. I think that's an often overlooked component. Like, should I be adding more? It's like, well, are you progressing? And it's like, yeah. Well, it's like, well, you don't have to add more. And there's no guarantees that adding more is going to provide like a robust benefit. So I find that's where I really started kind of dialing in my tracking is in that intermediate stage and focusing on, yeah, just making sure that sets stayed challenging over time. Like ultimately that's what we want to do. Like as we adapt, we need to make sure things are still tapping into like those high threshold, fibers. So then as you become more advanced, like Berto touched on, like you just kind of get a knack for it. Like I'll still bring a logbook in or type it into my phone or use an app, whatever. But it's oftentimes just like the first set, of a movement and maybe even the first couple movements of the day. Because once you start introducing fatigue and, unless you're timing your rest intervals, which would be like very anal to do in my opinion. But unless you're like really trying to make it apples to apples every session, then the data can be kind of misleading. So I like the idea that, that Berto said with, having like a diagnostic effort at the beginning that you can kind of gauge off of when there's not fatigue muddying the waters there.
What about you, Berto?
Well, the newbie phase, everyone progresses, but it's the intermediate phase where you start to catch these individual trends. So that's when I think it's most important because things will probably need to be mean, you'll progress anyways, but there's a big difference between an early intermediate that is just running around with a bad setup versus someone who is just doing something that is a little bit more data driven. Because we've had those athletes that are early intermediates, and they've been stuck for a while, and then we give them something sound, and all of a sudden they're flying through it. Like they feel like it's newbie gains 2.0. So for intermediates where not every set's going to be a highlight film, because that's how it is in the beginner stage. Like literally every set when you go in there, if you're training with the proper intensity, is probably going to be better than last week's. Shoot, as a matter of fact, during my noob phase, me and my training partners, we literally did the same workout 3 days a week. And it was just chest. It was everything in the front of the torso. And we saw progress week to week for a few months. Well, day to day rather. But whatever we did on, it's Wednesday now, whatever we did on Monday, we added some load, some reps. But then, yeah, you do get to that intermediate phase, and that's when, people start putting a little bit more thinking behind their actions. And it's a much better idea to just take the data you have rather than trying to copy and paste what some advanced bodybuilder out there is doing, because that's usually what intermediates do. It's like, oh, that worked for Chris Bumstead, so I'm gonna run his training block, and that's usually not the best way to go about it. Advanced phase, I think it's also important because there's going to be these heavy moments of resistance where your body, it's almost like telling you, like, you know what, we've adapted enough at this point. Like, this is kind of ridiculous. Like, it almost, sometimes it'll make you feel like you're having an off day. Like when you get in there, you're like, man, I really, like, it actually reminds me a lot of like my powerlifting days, where it's like an empty bar just feels like terrible. And you're like, how am I going to get through it? And it's just so odd how sometimes like those are the days where you do some of your best work. So even for advanced folks, because again, yeah, your body will be like, yo, chill, like we're done. It's just getting too expensive, too costly. We're putting too much resources into skeletal muscle. I'd much rather just stay here and having these objective targets, which again doesn't mean, especially in the advanced stage, that you're going to be like beating them every week or every 2 weeks, or every 3 weeks, but just kind of knowing where that target should float around in regards to especially load, the way Jeff uses it. Like, I think for you, Jeff, you kind of just, you know what your targets are right now, what weight you're munching on right now, and over time that's going to get better. I think for advanced athletes, this is especially important because there is true fatigue, where it's like, don't push it, like today's not the day. But there's also days where I swear to you, it's like if they feel similar, but you're actually very, very capable. And some of your biggest breakthroughs will take place within those moments. So I think everyone should track to some extent, have some sort of data that they, build future plans off of.
It's an excellent question, though, Jeff, because I almost feel like there's a million answers. I really do. I help out the 12, 13, 14-year-old boys on the football team, And a lot of times with those boys, I just tell them, you know what, I'm just give them a list of exercises. I'll take them through the gym, and I just tell them, I'm like, just do 3 sets of 10. Just make it hard. You don't have to track anything. Just get in there with your buddies, take turns, 4 of you on the leg extension machine, get 3 sets of 10, move on, do this. It's like, don't track at this point here. Just get in there with your buds, have fun, and work hard and make yourself sore, They're not going to track anyway. There's probably that one little kid like Brad, that's like 13 years old, that's got his little notebook out and he's writing everything down, but they're not going to track, And then likewise on the other side of it, it's like, I kind of feel like if you've got a coach, you have to track to some extent, because you guys have to kind of be on the same page, even if it's just kind of block to block or milestones or particular lifts that you're doing every now and then, kind of akin to how I'll see like CrossFitters as they're tracking their training, they've got a particular session that they do, like Isabel, or something like that, some workout that they do that involves like 3 or 4 movements, and they get this particular workout done in a particular period of time. They get that little kind of a audit, that little, moment in time where they completed Isabel or they completed, Fast Freddy or whatever it is in a certain period of time. And then they just go to work and their coach kind of outlines, okay, we need to work on this segment or that segment or this particular movement or that particular movement. They're not really tracking anything. They're just kind of writing things down on the little whiteboard, and they're getting through their training. But then 4 months down the road, when they go do Isabel or Fast Freddy or whatever the workout is, they're a little faster. They got a little bit of progress out of that. And so you've got kind of like off the opposite ends of the spectrum there. And it's, like I said, I feel like there's literally like a million different answers for that, but I just kind of try to categorize them into particular time frames and particular types of athletes and what they're looking for too. Hey, 3DMJers. This is Coach Brad Loomis here to talk about the biggest issue every serious lifter faces, and that's the issue of time. Unlike some other skill-based activities and sports that might show progress in a matter of days, strength training and hypertrophy is a much slower biological process. The consistent long-term effort it takes to put on muscle can leave most eager athletes spinning their wheels, second-guessing themselves, switching programs every month, and generally living life with a lack of confidence in their approach. All of these common pitfalls are the exact reasons why most lifters can waste years of their lives without making any meaningful progress towards their physique goals. But it's really not their fault. Even if a bodybuilder wants to be self-sufficient and tries to learn about their chosen craft, most online content is far too short to create a complete picture of what it means to live the life of a successful serious lifter. Aspiring athletes often piece together cookie-cutter programs and quick-fix strategies from various influencers only to be left in the same spot every 6 months. They don't get long-term results because they don't understand how training, programming, and nutrition planning actually work in the real world and how they work together. We created the 3DMJ Vault to change all that. 3DMJ Vault is an entire ecosystem of over 25 video courses that gel together to create a complete learning academy for bodybuilders who want genuine understanding of the sport. We don't just teach you what you do, we teach you how and why you're doing it. And once you fully understand the principles, we'll teach you how to tailor a customized approach for your goals, your physique, and your lifestyle. The Vault includes all of the video lectures, training programs, and nutrition plans you need to build a solid foundation as a serious lifter. To purchase our entire library of past, present, and future courses, go to 3dmjvault.com to sign yourself up today. You can get all access to all courses with a one-time purchase of a lifetime VIP membership or a one-time purchase of a single-year VIP membership. We made the Vault to create the future 3DMJ athletes we want to coach to the stage, and it's been doing exactly that since 2018. It also continues to grow over time as we add new courses every year that are always included for VIP members in the one-time purchase price. If you're serious about your lifting career and are willing to put in the work, we're confident that the Vault is everything you need to establish a bodybuilding lifestyle that supports your physique goals as a self-guided athlete for years to come. Get all access at 3dmjvault.com today. Again, that's 3dmjvault.com. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
I think one thing might be worth talking about is like what are some things that are not worth tracking that, or maybe as coaches that we're not paying much attention to, or Brad, maybe you don't have on a spreadsheet that maybe at one point we were. And I know for me, like volume load, like sets times reps times weight, like 2012, 2015, like every spreadsheet had a volume load calculation on it. Not yours, Jeff. You saw through the shit.
Yeah.
But no, it's a useful tool under very specific circumstances.
Yeah.
If you're doing the same rep range for the same number of sets on the same movement, then yeah, that should go up over time. But like it says nothing about the like qualitative like stimulative aspect of the work that you're doing. Like you could train very submaximally and accrue a ton of volume load. And for a while there, it was like volume load was the priority for people. It's like, I just need to increase volume load over time. And even then, like I remember thinking to myself, like this seems like it doesn't make that much sense because it just doesn't speak to the difficulty of any of this work. And it sort of assumes that volume needs to be going up over time, which I think that there needs to be appropriate context applied to that. So, I mean, do any of you still track volume load with any specific athletes or no?
You know, to be honest with you, Brian, the little spreadsheet that I track my training on and that my clients track on. In fact, it's the same spreadsheet that you can get when you take the bodybuilding program design course that kind of automatically calculates set volume. It's hidden. You can't really see it, but it actually is still there where it actually automatically calculates load volume, sets times load, etc., and reps times load, etc. It's still there, but anymore, I just kind of black out the columns, and just use them as separators. And you really have to dig and know where they're at to be able to find it. Because it's still there because I do the same sheets and I've just adopted them, but I don't pay attention to them anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of how I was. I would make spreadsheets to collect this data, and then 3 months into using them, I'm like, I'm not using any of this to guide any decision making. So at that point, you can kind of just unload that bandwidth.
My strength athletes, I used to track average load on their main lifts. So if they were squatting 3 times a week, I had a little metric where I would squat average load or calculate average load across the 3 sets. And I would just kind of watch over time and see if they were going up. And what I kind of found out was that, most of the intermediates, that load would go up. And it's like, well, do I really need to track that then? It's kind of a given.
Yeah. It's like if one day's going up, they're probably all going to trend that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of times I wouldn't look at it weekly like we were talking about earlier. I would zoom out, but I don't really look at that anymore either. A lot of times I can just tell by, what they used to open up with this on their lift and now they're opening up 10 pounds heavier, So yeah, I don't really pay attention to that much, really anymore. A lot of my sheets still calculate it and I might look at it, kind of look at the average of like block 1 compared to the average of block 4, but that's in a very rare instance that I'll actually look at it. And sometimes I'll use it just to kind of prove to somebody, look, your progress, you are progressing. You're doing good. Look at here. I'll show you. Here's what the sheet does, just to kind of give them proof. You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, otherwise I don't really look at that much anymore.
What about rest intervals? Do you guys
do.
assign that? Yeah.
I do if it's there. Like you get a feel for people when you have a video call with them, personality types, fast-paced type people, like they're in a hurry, that type of, I'm like, okay, I better put some rest times in here to ensure they're going to get enough rest between sets. It'd be opposite too. It could be someone like myself who's like very slow. Like I'm just a chill person.
It's been 12 minutes, Jeff.
Yeah, right. It's like, hey man, you're resting. Like you don't need 8 minutes. Let's cut that rest time down. So I think, if someone's advanced, they're not going to need me to tell them how long to rest. They have a good feel for their training. Someone who's new or intermediate, I think it makes more sense to do that.
I agree.
To give them some guidance there, because that's an important aspect in training. I just did a YouTube video on it. I mean, how many times have you seen guys, like here's another thing of tracking your reps. You see and this is something I pick up on in the spreadsheet is you see someone in their first set, they get, let's say 12 reps, and the second set they get 7 or 8. That's a pretty significant drop depending on the lift. And the third set, if you see more of a drop, okay, they're probably not resting long enough between sets. And it's like, why are they hurrying? Why are they in a rush? Oftentimes people try to cram in more than probably what they should, and ends up being fluff volume. It's like, well, if you cut some of that set volume down, rest longer than the sets that you have left that you're actually doing, you're going to get more reps. You're probably end up pushing yourself harder, getting closer to failure. So therefore, you're bringing in more muscle fiber. You're getting more effective reps there. So I think it's important, like some of these things that, like I said, spreadsheet, like tracking, it's important for this type of a reason, to get the fundamentals down, to get the principles down. Because it gets you to where all of us are at. We're like, okay, maybe not, I bet you none of us need a spreadsheet at this point. Like we could probably every training session go in there and go, okay, I know what exercise to do. I know what rep range for this exercise. I know the proximity of failure I need to be at. I know about how many sets I need to do to get the stimulus. Because we know ourselves really well. With someone who's new and intermediate, they can't really rely on themselves to decipher this. They need to log. They need to track. It's important. I think when tracking gets in the way is like when you start to overthink and overcomplicate things. Like I've seen some spreadsheets, not mine, but that's not ours, but I've seen some spreadsheets where I'm like, whoa. Like if someone gave this to me, I'll be like, no. Like there's way too many things to try to think about and worry about where it's going to stress someone to a fault. Because now you're no longer focusing on your training. You're focusing on trying to be perfect with your training. You're focusing more on the spreadsheet than the training itself.
I see that out a lot with like reps in reserve too. It's like, I don't know if that was a 2 or if it was a 1, and it's like just don't think about that. Just just pick one and try to be consistent with it and then evaluate. So
I'll give a range, 1 to 2,
exactly.
1 to
I
3.
usually give ranges.
And then, hey, send me some
RA.
videos. I want to see a main set. I want you to go where you think you should be going based on that target I'm giving you. And I can see if they got more in there or not. And I also want to tell them how it feels. And that'll help you. And then right there is like, okay, I know the answer isn't to give this person more set volume if their reps in reserve aren't even ideal. They're not on point.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that you're coaching quality of training more so than the numerical side of training. I think that should be like, you should develop skill first, moving from A to B properly. Then from there, I kind of layer it. Okay, A to B properly. Then from there, okay, I know they move really well. Now let me teach them how to get to failure, more technical failure first. And on lifts where it's safe, okay, now I'm going to take you beyond that. Go to absolute failure. So if you develop the skill for that, then I know the numbers we're hitting are going to be more true. That's how I try to layer it.
So my favorite way of tracking was something that I kind of landed on accident. And this was during the digital camera days. I remember got my first like big block digital camera, and I was throwing, according to me, some like pretty awesome weight on. It was the Cybex squat press. I had that thing full. I was tying plates to it, and I'm like, you know what? I need to take a video and post it on like bodybuilding.com so everyone can see how awesome I am. And I remember seeing the video, and I'm like, oh my God, like I had no idea it looked like that, because there was no phones. I still have the video out there too, and I was kind of baffled by how how it got to this point, because I knew that for sure it didn't always look that way. So like pretty soon after that, I started to see the value in it, even though it was very difficult to, like, coming into a gym in the early 2000s with a digital camera was like so taboo and weird that, being a young 20 something, I would literally go in when all the employees had left. I would go in at like 9, 10 p.m. just because this way I could record myself lifting. And overall, it made me a much better lifter. Not just because now I had this, and I encourage people to do this. It's like, hey, build a little lifting catalog of your lifts. Like YouTube has kind of like unlimited space. I think it has a 10 upload a day limit or something like that. But you can literally catalog your lifts. I can go back to like 2003 and see old lifts that I have performed and see how I've evolved, or in a more, I guess, immediate way, I can look at this movement that I did, I don't know, like sometime in January compared to now, which is a relevant time span for an advanced athlete, and compare those two. Because, we always, when athletes come to us about like they want certain arm measurement or they want a certain body fat percentage, like it's like, at the end, your goals look, it's something visual, right? And you can learn and take a whole lot of data from just observing something. And phones are so convenient. It's no longer taboo to record yourself. So if anything, like I get excited when I see an intermediate at the gym, like, on the logbook, I'm like, yo, like, okay, like this person's going to make some progress. But I'm even more excited when I see someone recording themselves and it's not for social media, whatever, like they literally run back to the phone afterwards.
To
It
watch
might
it.
be, but to watch it. And you can tell that they're reviewing the film. All other sports do this. Like, golfers go out there, they get video of their swings, they go back, okay, let me go fix that. Right. Football notorious for that, right? It's like the most boring part of that sport is like the film days. So I think it's something that, um, man, like it could even replace the numbers to some extent as long as you're logging that along with the lifts, or sometimes it can like really supplement the numbers where it's like, okay, I did 100 pounds on the dumbbell flat press for 5 uh, eh, 3 months ago, but then you look at your most recent one and maybe it got a lot better. It's like you are owning the weight throughout all the ranges of motion. Or maybe it even got worse. It will catch on that. It's like that false progress you speak of, Brian. You're like, ooh, okay, it's actually gotten a little choppier over time. So I think right now that it's so normalized to record yourself in the gym, people kind of do it with their physique. But I think when it comes to the thing that actually makes your physique progress, people underutilize this tool.
I use it
Yeah,
every
that's
time.
that's
Yeah.
that's when I find clients are the most excited because I like to have them get me a video of their last set of the one they failed. I want to see how you fail. I want to see did you fail because the muscle was kind of given out, or did you fail because you heaved it, jerked it, cut down the range of motion, etc. And as we're tracking performance and we're seeing these repetitions go up, they're failing in later and later and later repetitions. I'm like, okay, let's go back and visit that one again. Let's make sure that you're not, causing a false positive here. Let's see where you're failing. And they're you can just almost see the delight in their faces. They're checking in their text. It's like, wow, I look at the video, coach, that you had me do here where I failed on the sixth repetition on pull-ups, my strict pull-ups that were dead hang on that sixth rep. I didn't make it all the way up, and now here we are 2 months later and I failed on the 11th one. I got 10 full repetitions and I failed halfway up on the 11th repetition. And we've got video and we've got numbers. That's that's when the clients seem to be the most excited. Like they're more excited about that sometimes than when they put a half an inch on their biceps. What I mean? They literally love that. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Alberto. That's what makes the muscle grow. So yeah, that's when it's fun. When it's fun that you kind of get lost in the weeds and you forget because week after week after week, it's a failed at 5.5 again, failed at 5.5 again. Oh, yay, I got the sixth one. And then you kind of forget where you were when, you realize and poke your head above the water and realize that, oh yeah, 4 months ago, I was nowhere near that. I was about half.
Yeah. Yeah, I look back, kind of what I was alluding to earlier. I look back at the old logbooks, and some of the numbers are similar to what I'm using now, but I know if I had a camera back then, it would look drastically different. And you see, I think it's hard, especially if you've kind of been programmed to think like, okay, things need to be moving forward, on a somewhat consistent basis. It's humbling and it's hard to accept like stripping weight off the bar because like for them it's like, okay, now I'm regressing because my load is less. But I mean, it sounds obvious, but like your body doesn't know what the load is on the bar. It just knows like a torque demand at a given range of motion. And so if you're cleaning up technique, or if you're failing a lift and you see form breakdown, like it's usually one of two things. It's like, one, it's either that's just the easiest way for you to do it, or it's like your target muscle is the weak link at that point of the lift. And so you reallocate the demands, or you make it more mechanically efficient in that position. And that's not what we're trying to do. Like we're trying to keep things standardized. That way the performance improvements are actual performance improvements, not
They're
just on
real.
paper. Yeah. So yeah, I think video, that's a great recommendation. And I'll be the first to admit, like, I'm not a big camera in the gym guy. And it's not because I feel uncomfortable. It's just I like just focusing on the training, but I do still do it for those reasons. But it's yeah, I think that's the main thing is if you're coming down in weight for technique reasons, like that's nothing to be ashamed of or feel negative feelings about, because you're going to get probably a better stimulus with less fatigue, if we want to say that, but like it's going to have less wear and tear. It's going to be a more targeted, accurate movement, and you're going to be providing a much clearer picture for your training moving forward.
You know what I like to do to control the pace of the progressions? Like, what's your experience with this? Like mine, anytime I hit like a heavier load and let's say I hit the top end of a rep range, it's never perfect. It's always like there's a little shake to it, or, one arm's a little higher than the other one or whatever. I get it. And it's like, so I've kind of learned, over the years, like, okay, I'm probably not in a good position to up the load or the
Not
next
yet.
session. So what I've been doing with myself and with athletes is like, I want you to rinse and repeat that anywhere between 1 to 3 times. And the goal there is to improve the efficiency with that load and the number of reps. And if you guys, like you said, if you guys are recording that, you might be able to pick up on the visuals. How did that look? Did it improve over those 3 sessions visually? And then did it feel a little bit easier? Because if it did, then you're going to be a lot more confident increasing the load. And it's still going to be challenging enough. It's not like you're going to take a step back or you're going to atrophy because you're repeating the same numbers. If anything, like you said, Brian, you're getting more of a stimulus. But you're moving forward with a lot more confidence. It's like with any other sport, it's like you're not going to ask a running back to run 99 yards. Like, oh, you know what? Let's go 100 yards the next time. Like, okay, let's just put another running back in for a couple of plays. Give him some recovery, and then we'll toss you back out there. So that's what I've been doing a lot lately. I know there's some pushback I've had with some people because they're eager to make progress. Like, well, if I can do it, why are you going to slow me down? It's to develop skill, because when you get to the next load, you're going to be that much more skillful at it. And not just physically, but like mentally and emotionally too. Like there's that part of the side of lifting I don't think it's talked about enough. Like how many times you guys gone into a deadlift and you're like, fuck, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, man. You're like nervous about it. But if you repeated the prior load like 3 times in a row and you're like, okay, now I'm going to go in there, I can crush this 500 now. I can do it.
You get
Makes
like a
huge
running
difference.
start kind of. You have momentum, yeah.
100%.
Because I'll have to pull the reins back a lot of times on powerlifters, because that's nothing new with powerlifting. It's kind of like you hit a new PR, or say you hit a new PR with 1 rep in reserve or whatever. It's like, okay, now stop. Let's document this. If we got a video on it, let's put that away in a safe space. We're not touching that load for another 2 blocks. From now on, we're backing that down. We're going to hit training loads that you can hit. Develop that skill, eke it up a little bit, maybe here or there, but don't touch that load. Let's do it again in about 8 weeks of training. Because like Brian has said before, your ability to progress should be an outcome of your training. It's not a requirement. And I mean, basically, especially in your late novices and early intermediates, following that approach, every time you go back to that load again, it looks better. Look at it was a little bit faster. Oh, look, there's not quite as much shake in the middle of that deadlift. Oh, look, there's not quite as much good morning. It was the same load as it was 8 weeks ago. And then after another 8 weeks, now they're not only mastering it, they're tempted to get that same load for a double. And then you bring the load up a little bit, shakes a little bit, it's a little bit shaky, but you got it. Okay, start the whole process over again. It's a very patient man's process, some of the Russian training periodization they used to do, they would start with a heavy load where it was really hard to get, like, say, 4 sets of 6, and they would just rinse and repeat the 4 sets of 6 over and over and over again for like 4 or 5 weeks of training. And by the end of that 4 or 5 weeks, they're thumping that 4 sets of 6. I mean, they are moving it and they have mastered it, and then they bump the weight up and they start it all over again. A lot of those Russian trainers back in the day, if you didn't like that, if you, didn't like the fact that you had to rinse and repeat and run this boring system, fine, go do your thing. I don't care. And that's how they kind of built like all those strong power lifters back in the day. Those were the guys that were dedicated to the process, and they didn't need to have the fancy training with new stuff interjected every now and then.
One way that the recording helps me is, I hinted at the whole, sometimes your body would rather not progress. It'd just rather chill on the couch. Like again, the resistance is like real similar to like when you're trying to get lean. Like your body's like, yeah, I don't want to move and I want to eat a lot of food and I just want to feel better. But you know where you need to go, right? The recording helps me a lot with my last warm up before I go, because I'll film it. And so long as I don't feel like I can hurt myself, like there's days where like your body's telling you like, hey, like something's not ready over here. I think you should calm down. Like those days, absolutely. I'll listen to those. I'd rather have a one off day than like make it a drama for like 2 months or something. But where it really helps me is like on those like fake fatigue days almost, where I'm like, oh, I know what I'm supposed to do today. I know what I can technically do. But everything's just feeling miserable. And then I'll record my last warm up, try to make it look as snappy and as good as I want. Like take that rep real serious. Usually it's a rep. Sometimes I'll rep it until I get a normal one that feels normal. Then I'll see the video and I'm like, oh, okay. Like actually that kid has it in him.
Move better than you
or,
thought. Yeah.
or the exact opposite sometimes, where it's like, oh, actually, yeah, today just tone it down by 10% or something. But this is especially beneficial if you train alone, because that's what training partners do. A good training partner knows you sometimes a little better
That
than you know
feedback.
yourself, right? Yeah, and they're able to tell you like,
Yeah.
yo, like a good training partner, not like one of those training partners with like the cutoff shirts. It's the answer is always add more, but a real good training partner. I miss having Cynthia as my training partner, because it's crazy how it works. Like men usually tend to be too aggressive with their loading and women maybe a little bit more timid. So there's like that fine balance in between, where she would tell me if I didn't have it today. And I'd tell her like usually the other way around. It's like, no, I think you could rock back with those dumbbells. But if you don't have a training partner, like that is where video really
That
comes
camera,
in handy.
yeah.
You have some good days that you just didn't think was in the cards. And over time that can add up to something.
Jeff, so you had mentioned like how long to keep at a certain load before increasing, and I do that too. One approach I've even taken at times is like, okay, let's say you got 10 reps at like a roughly 2 RIR or something on your last set, and the next week, like replicate it until maybe it feels like a solid 3 or 4 RIR. Like that's the stimulus, like the pushback on that is like, well, the stimulus isn't like, I'm not pushing as close to failure. Am I getting as good of a stimulus? Like you're still getting a solid stimulus, like a 3-4 RAR, especially like on a compound lift is like, that's still pretty challenging. But what I found with like more advanced athletes, not only are they adapting slower, so we can't expect these rep increases on an ongoing basis, but it's kind of like a sort of like built-in fatigue management, if we want to use that. Like we're not redlining things. It's like there's a week where we push and then we have an objective, we go in, we hit it, we're focused, but it kind of gives our body a little bit of a break. And then the other overlooked aspect of that approach, I think, is a lot of people forget that like connective tissue, it doesn't adapt at the same rate as muscle. And that's one reason why I really like double progression, like earn your increase in load, is it's a more like graded exposure to these increases in load rather than like
It's conservative. Yep.
Mhm. And you're still going to get a great stimulus. Like even if you keep load the same, let's say you're not replicating reps, like having to do it for 2 or 3 times. Even if you just do more reps with the same load, like you're going to get a same hypertrophy stimulus than if you would have increased the load, which is kind of a nice fact of hypertrophy, is like it's not discriminant against adding loads or reps. Like you can get a good stimulus either way. So that I think alone, I think a lot of people, the more advanced they become, like just aches and pains sometimes become the bottleneck for them. And so you want to manage things based off whatever like the weak link in the chain is. And so if you're constantly getting banged up, take a more conservative approach, you're still going to progress, but you're going to come out ahead in most cases because you're going to feel healthier as a result.
Okay. I think, I mean, that's good. It's good points. I mean, obviously I'm older, so a lot of my training evolves around how my joints feel.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my program is based on that.
That's how it is for
But
me.
I think outside of just like recording those sessions where you're duplicating numbers, I think it's important just in general, probably just to take notes as well in your spreadsheet, how things are actually feeling. Like you can hit 10 reps this week, wanted to take next week's the same thing, but it could feel completely different to you. It can feel like, man, I wasn't grooving too well, or whatever note you need to put there to kind of identify how things feel. And that helps you to make better decisions in the future and how you should gauge your training. I used to do that a lot as when I was younger. I would like take notes like that along with the numbers.
Yeah. Adding that context helps.
100%. It's like a lot of my Instagram posts. It's like in the captions, it's like now I used to post like the sets and the reps and all that. Now I just I'll put like French press 2 sets. That's all I put.
Yeah.
But I used to put a lot of context in the captions because it's more than just the numbers. Like the numbers are only going to tell you so much. So it is important to take notes.
Well, and you lift with a much probably slower tempo than you used to as well, I would imagine. I mean, you're very controlled in your movements, so your poundages.
The poundages are lower in general than they used to be.
Exactly, but the stimulus is still there.
It's still very high, and you can make a case that my training might even be harder now than it used to be because of that control requires a ton of effort. So to control eccentric for 4 seconds in comparison to 2 seconds, think of the force you have to generate to control that speed. And then moving it the other way. Okay, you go all the way down. Okay, there's no momentum. Now you got to, from a dead stop, you're going to push this load from a dead stop up without the faster eccentric and the whip up. You can make a case that it could be more stimulative and harder than with the heavier loading. So that's why take notes. It's not just the numbers, it's note taking.
Yeah.
Recently I'm getting bashed by a few people oh, you're not lifting, you're weak, you're lifting light stuff. And I'm like, okay, you don't get it. I don't want to go into context with them, but I'm I'll be here writing a book.
I still think, and I'm probably beating a dead horse here, but a lot of this just boils down to people misunderstanding what progressive overload is and feeling like they need to keep moving the needle in the logbook. And it does boil down to just what you said. You're keeping the sets challenging. If you there's plenty of people that never log that still make solid progress because they're pushing close to failure on every set. Most advanced gym bros that aren't, super into the data, they're doing this. It's they go in, they train to failure. That's might use the same one. And honestly, I think there's something to be said for the simplicity behind that. It's that if you're you pick the same load, you take it to the house. If you get one, eventually a few weeks will go by, you get one more rep. That is progressive overload. But slowing tempo down and regressing a movement in terms of poundages, that's not, as long as the set is still challenging, you're seeing this involuntary reduction in velocity kind of that we talked about a few podcasts ago. That's what you're after.
It's just resetting a baseline. It's a different approach. You're just resetting a baseline. The goal, I don't slow rep speed down and go, okay, I'm going to just try to let my loads go down and down from this point. It's okay.
It's just
I went from
away.
a 2 second eccentric to a 4. Okay, now here's the baseline. Let's kind of level the load and reps up from this point again.
Yeah.
With intention and getting to close enough to failure to get that stimulus.
Sometimes we'll see, I've seen people make comments technique is not a form of progressive overload. And that's a sign that they're focused on the wrong things.
The wrong thing.
Because if technique is allowing you to get more stimulus out of less load, then yes, it's absolutely a form of progressive overload. If you lift the same weight with better execution, then those muscles are producing more force in those positions where there's normally breakdown. So all of this, I think my big take-home message from this is tracking is important, but you also need to understand what the purpose is behind tracking. And it's not to like see this upward slope across your entire training career necessarily, because that you're going to notice like you might see this upward slope. It's starting to come at the expense of technique. You become an intermediate. You dial back a bit. Sometimes you're doing less volume, like is the case with me. I went from pushing volume really hard at the beginning to then scaling back. I had more focus with a smaller amount of workload. And so like it was easier for me to kind of get up for those sets, and I saw good progress with less volume. So yeah, so if you're comparing apples to like true apples to apples, including execution, then yeah, you should see things trend up a little bit over time. Or you should see things trend up over time.
Yeah, and a lot of times when I'm coaching people on cutting their volume down, they've been afraid for years to cut their volume down, and I always break it down for them in a particular hierarchy. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong in my thinking, but in my hierarchy, the reps is at the very bottom. The reps fall all the way to the very bottom. The hierarchy is always number one, get the effort in there. You know, if you're doing one set to failure, make sure that that set that you've got programmed for that is to failure. And it doesn't matter if it's heavy load or if it's light load. And it doesn't matter if it's 6 reps or if it's 12 reps. Get that set to failure. And I mean, does it really matter? Does your body know really that they got 6 reps versus 12 reps? I mean, maybe if you're talking like time over getting the repetitions done, but it boils down literally to my hierarchy from top to bottom is effort, and then sets, and then load, and then repetitions. That's kind of like from top to bottom. Maybe the top 2 maybe could be your interchangeable depending on what your focus is. Top being effort, second being sets. Maybe you could switch that, sets on top and then effort. But really, that's kind of what it boils down to. And when people don't want to track, like if they're just like, Coach, I just want to get in there and get after it. I don't really care about what my numbers are. I just want to get in there and work. I'm like, okay, whatever your exercises are, first thing, focus on effort. If it's one set to the house, take it one set to the house, regardless of the load, regardless of the repetitions. If it's 2 sets, maybe leave a couple reps on the first one, but then always take the second one to the house, because that's ultimately what it boils down to. And a lot of times, I mean, I'm kind of shocked myself when people will take a lighter load to failure. Obviously, they got to get more repetitions, right? But a lighter load to failure or to whatever their proximity to failure is, it doesn't hurt their joints as much as the heavier load. Like to me, it's kind of mind-boggling. I always thought, well, if you're taking it to failure, it's going to hurt either way, because those last few repetitions they're gonna kind of push you out of the comfort zone, I guess you might say. But at the same time, I have found so many people that it's like, Coach, when I take X load and fail at 9, it hurts. It hurts that joint. It hurts for days afterward. But if I take a lighter load and I fail at 15, not only does it not hurt in the session, I don't feel the pain after the session either. And that was, for me, kind of mind-boggling in a way. I'm like, wow, okay, we can get the same effort with a lighter load and there's no pain. Why would you, who would be dumb enough not to take advantage of that?
Could be exercise dependent too.
For sure.
Exercise dependent, individual dependent. I know for me personally, like talking about me, like 9 reps and 15 reps, depending on the exercise, feel completely different. Like I think what you're saying, acutely, it doesn't stress my joints as much. But if you're thinking more long term, like if you're doing 15 reps repetitively over time versus 9, so it's like we know in the 9, if you're hitting 9 reps, you don't have to be to failure. So an easy solution would be like, oh, I'll just go 1 in the tank, 2 in the tank, if you want to be in that rep range. And if you want to go 15 or above, like, okay, yeah, let's make sure you're hitting failure. But I'm thinking like more repetitions you do or higher repetitions you do doesn't necessarily always equate to easier on the joint, especially if it's repetitive over time, because it's actually more repetitions on that joint over time.
That's a good point.
So you can like swing it like, okay, instead of doing 9 reps, let's just do 7. Leave 2 in the tank. You're still going to get a stimulus.
One thing you guys hinted at that's worth going a little deeper into especially since it's peak contest prep season. Like most people who are going to compete this year are already involved in a contest prep diet. We can learn from the whole how sometimes taking a load increment that you haven't earned, that's not really your weight yet, can provide less stimulus, right? I like to use the example of the 0 to 100 stimulus scale, right? You take a guy that was doing 275 on the squat, like to, good depth, right? And all of a sudden he feels like, you know what, I'm going for that third wheel. And he lost a lot of that range of motion in particular in the most, the juiciest part of the rep, right? The bottom part of the rep.
In the hole.
Like the 275 on the stimulus scale, like a set taken close to failure, might have been, I don't know, like a 92. And now with this new technique, it's like you just bumped it down to like an 80, right? So that's something to be cautious of, when it comes to promoting yourself too early. Like you might just be getting more fatigue and less stimulus, and eventually some sort of roadblock or bottleneck will show. But where contest preppers can learn from this is that sometimes the way to get better stimulus and maintain more muscle is to actually drop the load. I mean, that's just how it works, right? You powerlifters understand this. Like we all have friends that they compete maybe in the 74 kilo class, and they don't want to jump up to the next class because they're like, "Ooh, I'm gonna get mobbed," because they know like those few pounds make a difference. Same thing with us. It's like as you lose weight, like sometimes being extra stubborn about keeping a certain load will put you in a position where, and I've had it happen to me, where you're like, man, like what happened? I've kept all my strength according to the spreadsheet anyways, but I lost muscle in that region. And quite often that's because, they should have folded a hand. Like they were providing worse tension, if anything, by being stubborn about keeping it there. I've made that mistake. Actually, last prep, I made that mistake. And in hindsight, I did see a little bit of a difference in my chest with my dumbbell chest presses. Like I was like in the off season and early in the prep, I was going slightly behind the midline of my torso. And towards the end of the prep, because I was stubborn, I wanted to keep something close to triple digits on those presses.
You're
I was
shortening
like,
your range of motion.
it was like a floor press, basically. Yeah. So it's one of those things where well, we've all done it, because we understand how, well, at least on paper, it should work, but that's where the visuals matter. And it's worth, like, the mind muscle connection thing is kind of convoluted, because I think sometimes what people consider a positive sensation that it's working, it's like you're looking at the wrong things. But when you have an exercise dialed in, it's like what it should feel like across those regions. The sort of like for me, my posterior chain is very easy to identify when it's going right. It's like I feel minimal lumbar compared to what it looks like, and I feel a lot of like pressure in those muscles. But I can I can tell as I'm dieting down that, oh shoot, like I'm no longer feeling the pressure in the right places. I'm feeling a little bit more lumbar. And if I continue doing this, it's like, it will look good on the stat sheet, but at the end, it might end up showing up on the physique. So learning how to regress sometimes, I think, is important. And that's what it looks like on paper. But at the end, it's the same net tension. There's no real way to quantify that other than just make note of what your lifts feel and look like in the off season when you're performing them right, and as you're dropping weight, it's just going to be a function of you losing weight, that those exercises are going to have to come down at some point, especially I'd say every like 5-ish to 3-ish% of body weight that you lose.
You guys have a new item to track in your spreadsheets, and that's the stimulus scale. Wink, wink, wink. I'm joking. But that's a great analogy, Berto.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it's hard because as natural athletes, we've sort of been programmed to think like, okay, performance in the off season when you're, have ample body fat, you're not going to be growing to the point where you're seeing these robust visual changes to confirm that you're building muscle. So you look at performance is kind of the best proxy that we have for muscle gain. And once you start cutting, like that relationship doesn't necessarily hold true for muscle maintenance. And like what I always tell people, like there's a reason that strength scales with weight classes in these sports. You know, it's like you could put on 10 pounds of body fat with no additional muscle mass and feel stronger, you
And
know,
move heavier loads. Yeah.
yeah. So I like that. Like in the off season, like looking at performance is kind of the proxy for success, assuming you're checking the other boxes with execution and, you know, keeping things fairly standardized is good. But in prep, like I remember when I prepped last, I mean, and I was coming off an off season where I was powerlifting and pretty like data driven for most of that. It got to a point where, you know, I was no longer tracking my training other than making like sets and effort per set. And when you think of it that way, like just make sure each set is challenging and understand like especially compound movements. Like we always hear I always wondered this, you know, like you hear the term tissue leverages and like no one can really like explain what that actually means. You know, it's like cuz like it's not like anything is changing structurally, but when you lose body fat, like the execution of a lift is going to change. And, you know, it was Eric and I think Brad, we did one on like training during fat loss phases, a podcast months ago, but Eric had provided that anecdote of, you know, when he did his meet in his, I think 2019 prep, or maybe it was his one before, after that, but his bench kind of went down pretty noticeably. And he said, you know, I lost a lot of fat off of my glutes. And if you think about it like a traditional bench press for powerlifting, it's like if you have any semblance of an arch, like you're required to keep your butt on the bench, that's going to like lower your sternal angle basically,
Yeah,
which
range of motion increased.
your
Huh?
range, like, yeah, you gain like
Yeah.
an inch range of motion. And I experienced that in my last prep where like my bench was the strongest it had ever been in the off season. It was like the one time I hit 405 in the gym. Have to make sure I mention that. But I remember I did a meet probably like it was 2/3 of the way through prep and I was like 180. And in the off season, normally I was like 205 to 210. So it was a noticeable amount of fat loss, but it was funny because like my training wasn't really fully catered towards powerlifting because like bodybuilding was the first priority. But I saw that my pec deck, where you can like set the pin to standardize the range of motion, like it stayed almost entirely intact, but my bench went down to like 330. So it's like if I was using that as a proxy for muscle maintenance, like it would be extremely discouraging. And fortunately, like I knew enough to not really tie too much emotion into that other than like it's not fun prepping for a powerlifting meet when you're progressively getting weaker. But it's not something I would recommend. But yeah, I think looking at performance is kind of this proxy for muscle maintenance. It can kind of lead to the scenario that you're talking about, Berto, where people are trimming that range of motion, thinking like, okay, I need to keep this load intact in order to maintain that muscle. And that's just not how the physiology works.
Yeah, you're working really hard to lose muscle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good point.
So that's where taking notes is important. If you're not advanced,
Yeah.
obviously.
But really, I think effort's probably like I mean, you don't need to nail RIR perfectly, but if your sets are routinely challenging and seeing that like reduction in velocity by the end, like that involuntary reduction, like you're training in that quote unquote effective range at that point.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you continuously do that, even in prep, if numbers like absolute poundages are going down, like that's not a red flag. That's just kind of expected.
Yeah, because you'll have to reset every once in a while during a prep. You might have to adjust your loads based on where your levers are at.
Yeah.
And I look at it this way too, like what I'm lifting in the middle of prep, what I'm lifting at the end of prep is probably relative to what I'm lifting in the off season, pound for pound, kilo for kilo.
Mhm.
Talking about body weight to loads.
Mhm.
So I don't stress
Payload.
on
Mhm.
performance drop-offs unless it's like successive weeks. Like every week I'm seeing the lift just go down and down and down. That's a red flag. It's usually okay, probably end up dieting too hard or you're not sleeping or what have you. The demand is just way too high. Sure.
Yeah, shoot, Brian, if I would have seen that your pec deck was holding on as you were dropping all that body weight, I'd have been like, that's a win, man.
Yeah. No, and it
Yeah,
was
that's
like
a big win.
it was almost just humorous. Like, okay, this is crazy how much this has dropped off.
Yeah.
But then like I mean, this isn't the topic of the podcast, but like exercise selection in contest prep, you might get away from those free weight compound movements, and like machines, they can be mentally less taxing. They can like when you lose fat, you lose some built-in stability. Like a machine kind of provides that. And so I remember after that meet, I just switched over to I think I was doing all machines. I mean, I wasn't back squatting because it wasn't a productive use of my time at that point. And so, yeah, I think you need to be pliable in how you manage your training in those, at least at the, especially at the end of a contest prep.
One more thing on that, on weight and progression, because you kind of said it, Brian, and that's just that, especially with those more almost linear bulks, just something to be wary of, because you're right. Like I've had it happen where I've taken these breaks from training. Like it happens actually after contest prep, and then I'll come back and just mob weight that was like incredibly hard to perform just a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, dude, like I said, I'm weird. Like I know my PRs for like different weight brackets,
And
like,
that's good. Like that, yeah. Like we talk about comparing apples to apples with like just the variables. Like body weight is a big part of that as well.
And then pretty soon you guys are going to be tracking age. You've got your body weight and when you were 38, and then you've got when you were 46, and now you've got when you're 52.
Age goes up, so does tempo.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I'm tired of tracking, but I'm still going to track because it's kind of important.
Yeah.
Just to keep me moving forward.
Yeah.
I guess one last piece of advice I'd say for people who hate tracking, just track your first set on everything, because technically that's when you're the freshest.
Mm-hmm.
It's much less painful, and honestly, I think I have a lot of my athletes actually do that, especially the ones I'm pretty familiar with. It's easier and
keeps you from being complacent.
Yeah, if you hit like a really good first set, what's going to happen to your third set? It's going to be garbage. Like, do I need to see that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I pay little attention to like the volume after the first set, because who knows what the rest interval was. I know for me, an extra like 30 seconds of rest can make a big difference. So,
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Well, we'll talk to you guys next week.